Hello, everyone. My name is L.J. Stambuk. I'm the president of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, and I'm delighted to have with us Ambassador Dirk Wouters of Belgium to the U.S. Some of you may remember that Ambassador Wouters was kind enough to come and join us in Charlotte two times previously. We were hoping for a third time during his mandate as the Ambassador of Belgium to the U.S. Unfortunately, this pandemic has prevented a lot of things, so we are hosting Ambassador Wouters from the new Belgium embassy in Washington, D.C. It has just opened. It has state-of-the-art technology, and we will all one day come and visit you, Mr. Ambassador, or visit the embassy with World Affairs Council members from Charlotte. We would love to see that. So hereby, I'm opening the World Affairs Council Distinguished Speaker Series program today with Ambassador Wouters. A little bit of memories, Mr. Ambassador. This is you over your two visits here in Charlotte. And we see you standing with Wayne Cooper, our chairman of the board. In the middle, it's you and Laura Wellman-Mayer, who is the Honorary Consul of France now to North Carolina, and Peter Vasiko, who is the Honorary Consul of Czechia, or the Czech Republic, to North Carolina. To the left here with students of schools that participate in World Affairs Council programs. And with you is the ambassador, then ambassador of the EU to the US. And then we have you speaking between flags and with the World Affairs Council flag behind you as well. And again, we enjoyed you. You were one of our dearest guests among the many we have here. And we do wish that once you are no longer an ambassador, you come to the US and you do visit us in Charlotte as a private citizen. We would love to have you here, Mr. Ambassador. I would like to thank you, our presenting sponsor, Greer Walker, a leading regional CPA firm and of advisors, and it is based in Charlotte and Greenville, offices in Charlotte and Greenville. Thank you, Greer Walker, for being the presenting sponsor of the Distinguished Series program today with Ambassador Dirk Wouters of Belgium. Finally, as many of you know, but maybe some of you don't, the World Affairs Council of Charlotte is the community's premier global education nonprofit, and it is non-partisan, very important. Please do note, as we go into the program, that your microphones will be on mute and your camera will be turned off for the duration of the presentation. However, you'll be able to submit a question at any time. And please do that soon so we can get your question into the queue. Please use the Q&A box in the Zoom toolbar, and we have circled it with a red marker for you to see where the Q&A box is in the Zoom toolbar. This presentation will be recorded and will be sent out via our World Affairs Council mailing list to all our members and supporters. So please make sure you're signed up to receive the World Affairs Council Charlotte emails. If you enjoyed today's free program, please do consider making a financial gift to help support our work and sustain the World Affairs Council in this difficult times when we don't have live programs. Our web address is www.worldaffairscharlotte.org/giving. We appreciate it very, very, very much. Let me share with you the biography of our distinguished speaker, Ambassador Wouters, today. The ambassador presents His Majesty the King of the Belgians and Belgium's federal government in the United States of America and in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The ambassador is responsible for the direction and work of the embassy and its consulates, including bilateral political economic relations and visa and consular services. Ambassador Wouters' career has included both multilateral and bilateral assignments and have been primarily focused on European affairs. Dirk Wouters joined the Belgian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1980, and his career started in the consular and disarmament departments. He has also served in the European Union as the coordinator of the Belgian presidency and negotiated multiple treaties. Ambassador Wouters was also one of the main architects of the successful Belgian EU presidency and key foreign policy decisions on Afghanistan and Libya. Mr. Wouters is no stranger to the United States. having lived in New York while Deputy Permanent Representative of Belgium to the United Nations, 1995 to 2000, with a special responsibility for coordination and for overseeing the work in the political, military, economic, and development section. In this position, he was involved in the creation of the International Criminal Court. Mr. Wouters is also the former chairman of the Association of Diplomats of the Belgian Foreign Service. What a biography. Ambassador Wouters, thank you very much for being with us, and I will turn it over to you. It is a great pleasure to see you again.
Thank you very much, LG. Can everybody hear me from where I'm sitting? And by the way, this new embassy of Belgium in Washington is located in K Street, where all the law firms and the lobbying firms are located. So it's very bad for my reputation that we moved here. But by way of introduction, let me start by wishing you all and your families a good health, and my thoughts really go, as I will be speaking of COVID and Belgium, my thoughts go to all those combating the disease, and in the first place the health workers. Too many of them have died, and but they are still working on the front lines. Let's not forget it. LG and dear friends in Charlotte, I really want to commend the work of the World Affairs Council in Charlotte. Today, I have been packing for my move back to Europe, to Belgium, and one of the last documents I packed, and it's now being loaded in big boxes, is my passport, your passport you gave me of the World Affairs Council in Charlotte. And so this is also an excellent souvenir, like the souvenirs, LG, that you showed in the beginning of this program. And so I never stopped following your activities, I have to say, including the 5 most important issues roundup of the week. I continue to read about your activities, your webinars, and all your educational and other actions. So I would love to keep the relationship between Belgium, Charlotte, the World Affairs Council, through the embassy and through the Consulate General of Belgium in Atlanta. So the first theme you've asked to address is the response of Belgium to the COVID-19. Now, we have been, Belgium, like the other countries around the world, especially in the Western world, we have been hit in the same way and with the same dimensions. So we've been hit from a health perspective, from an economic and socio-economic perspective, and we've been hit from a political and governance perspective. So how has the government responded given the fact that all these dimensions were hitting us, and what are the lessons that we may have learned and we may have to apply in the future? I will make 4 or 5 points here. First of all, and that's certainly a lesson, but also an action that was undertaken, all parts of the government came together to mitigate a crisis of this scale. Now, it's only by working together at all governance levels that we think we can address a crisis of that nature. Now, in this respect, maybe Belgium is special. It's a democracy since 1830, but it has developed into a federal state with a highly complex governance system. We all know this. Some things are familiar to you probably in the United States with the federal structure, and we've seen the importance of governors in the individual states. And I have to say, I've worked a lot with governors in order to help our companies to reopen or to restart or to pivot to new activities that are COVID-19 related. So, but it was, we came together with the federal government, who still has a lot of, a big say in everything that concerns public finance, the judicial system, the army, social security, foreign affairs, as well as substantial parts of public health and home affairs. So also in the field of social security, such as employment, pensions, child benefits, health insurance, the federal government still has a say. But Belgium is also organized along territorial lines, and we have a couple of regions in the south, Wallonia, in the north, Flanders, in the center, Brussels. We have communities that are organized along cultural and linguistic lines. Two communities, mainly three communities, the Flemish-speaking, the French-speaking, and the German-speaking. And they also have to say, these regions and these communities have a say in public health, retirement homes, elderly homes, and so they also were, of course, involved in the governance of the crisis. And then there are 10 provinces in Belgium who have a role that can be compared to FEMA, the agency here to combat disasters, and then 581 cities and communes. So complex structure, but from the beginning, the decision was taken that we should come together. Second aspect of the crisis management in Belgium was that when the crisis hit us, Belgium was in the process of forming a government after the last elections. And so there was a caretaker government in place when COVID hit us, was led by a very competent new face, a female prime minister, Sophie Wilmès. And so what happened politically is that the parliament, the newly elected parliament, came together and took the decision to support, through all party lines, the minority government that was a caretaker government. So they said, whatever you do for COVID, we will support it. And we will support it with all the parties that are now represented in the new parliament. So that was probably also specific. And the main tool of crisis management was our National Security Council, chaired by the Prime Minister. And it fulfilled the central role in policy decisions, and the decision-making process was meant to be as inclusive as possible, both when it came to decisions on public health. And I can testify to the fact that all decisions were, or almost all decisions, science-driven, health data-driven. They took the decisions on the economic recovery and also on the socio-economic impact. So what to do with the unemployed, the labor conditions, public life, the schools, and so on. So that was my second point on the response. The third point is, what was the strategy substantive-wise? Well, I would say 3 T's. T, the letter T: test, trace, and treat. Test, trace, and treat, including quarantine for those affected by the virus. Initially, like in most parts of the United States, a lockdown was put in place, which lasted 47 days. And but then, since then, there has been a gradual reopening of society and of the economy, and quite naturally, the beginning of a surge, a second surge, maybe we are not sure yet, started. So in recent days, seeing a renewed growth in positive cases, like it is unfortunately also the situation in other European countries, neighboring countries of Belgium, like even Germany, but also in Austria, in France. In the Netherlands, after travel was allowed again in Europe, the National Security Council has taken recently, so the last week, new decisions, more stringent decisions. So, for example, each family has to stick to 5 in a bubble, excluding the children under 12 years old. They're not counted in that bubble. Working from home is again the norm, and the masks are mandatory in almost all situations, and you always have to carry the mask. So if you go to a restaurant, like it is the case here in Washington today, you have to register your attendance, and also when you go to a bar, a swimming pool, there is obligatory registration. So shopping, it's one person that can go in the shop, so it's restrictive again, not 2, no groups. So much stricter measures than a couple of weeks ago, and in some most affected areas, like in Antwerp today, the measures have even been more strict. For example, there is a curfew that has been decided in the province of Antwerp, meaning that you cannot go out and celebrate during the night from 11:30 to 6 in the morning. And so during the summer, that came as a shock to most of the young people who prefer to celebrate. I want to zoom in just 1 second on specifically on counting, which has been a cornerstone in the Belgian response. You may have seen in some statistics in the newspapers that we are credited with a rather high number of deaths in Belgium. I think up to now it's 9,836 as we speak. But in that counting, we included from the beginning, we included not only the deaths in the hospital that are COVID related, but also those in nursing and elderly homes and other healthcare establishments. So unlike hospitals, these organizations have not always been able to systematically test deceased for COVID-19, but they are in our statistics. There's a whole debate around it in Europe because there's no unique accounting standard for COVID-19 victims in the European Union, and there is this debate, but we have opted for a different criterion of counting compared to others. Now, I close this parenthesis, and I would like to mention a 4th point, of course, preparedness, which is key. Did we have problems with strategic stockpile? In the beginning, it was not entirely optimal, our stockpile of PPE, but this small, let's say, shortage was quickly remedied, and everybody tried to help, including the king, who called some colleagues, including his Chinese counterpart, to have as quickly as possible the necessary PPE material. The healthcare system, was the healthcare system prepared? I think that overall there was sufficient preparedness. We have a rather robust healthcare system with, let's say, universal coverage, free access, and good access, and free choice. So these are the 3 characteristics of a healthcare system in Belgium. But it's we were never in trouble, and we're still not in trouble with a lack of hospital capacity for the treatment of COVID-19 victims. There were sufficient beds available all the time and sufficient number of critical care units. So that was okay. Were the diplomats ready for this? Of course, they didn't see it coming, but they reacted, I think, fast and professional. I've seen a lot of my colleagues involved in what I would call the largest repatriation operation in the history of the country. When it comes to economic measures, unemployment, well, the protection of individuals is in principle guaranteed by the welfare system. So if you got furloughed, laid off for technical reasons because there was not enough work, you still kept your salary up to, on average, is 70%. So there is a safety net. And of course, the government took the necessary measures to support business, especially the small and medium-sized companies. Last remark on the response, and maybe the most important, international cooperation to address this crisis. Now, we Belgians, we believe strongly in working together. And the scientists and Belgian scientists and companies are active and well represented around the world. I know a lot of vaccine hunters in my country, as they are called, and treatment hunters. But it's not just in vaccines, also in testing. I discovered, and I found it interesting, that a company from the south of the country, Wallonia, which is called Coris Bioconcept, very early in the crisis, developed a testing which is called a 15-minute antigenic test, meaning that this test, approved, of course, by the federal authorities, that within 15 minutes you had a result, and that proved to be a useful tool especially in hospitals and later on also in the elderly homes, because once you had the result within the 15 minutes, you were not required anymore to pass the different tests, what is called the molecular diagnostic tests in the laboratories. So the test was considered to be a valid test. In vaccine development, there are a couple of companies that are active. I mean, maybe I can report that as we speak, the European Commission is talking to basically 4 companies in Europe to do the buying or to do the buying agreements in advance of the discovery of and bringing on the market of a successful test. And these companies are, first of all, the Belgian pharmaceutical company Janssen Pharmaceutica, which belongs to Johnson & Johnson, well known in the United States. And so they, in mid-July, I think they started testing of a vaccine on humans. That is one of the companies. The other 3 are AstraZeneca, which is working together with Oxford University. They seem to be well advanced, and also Pfizer. And then the 4th company that European Commission is negotiating agreements, pre-sales agreements, in fact, is Sanofi. Also here in the embassy in Washington, we try to do our part, and we organized, of course, a lot of support actions mainly to the hospitals in Washington, most of them, by providing Belgian meals. And we had a good partnership involving Belgian restaurants and other benefactors than the embassy. So and also the schools in some areas of Washington that maybe were a bit more programmatic areas. We set up a program of providing learning from distance, computers and so on. But I think we had to do this in order to show our recognition to the community we are honored to live in here in Washington. But you mentioned, LG, that I'm also responsible for the Bahamas. And in the Bahamas, I must say I'm very proud that I could also launch a couple of projects with schools. And so in the coming years, the Bahamian kids will use our sanitizers to keep their hands clean at school. So I will stop here, and of course I can answer your questions on the COVID reaction in Belgium, but maybe a few words on the economy, which of course will lose some of its value this year. I've calculated that on an economy that is still worth $550 billion, I think the loss this year will be around $50 billion, so which is a 8 to 9 percentage of GDP loss. Next year, the most credible predictions, insofar you can predict credibly these days, it's very difficult, I know, but the most credible say that the economy might veer up again between 6 and 7%, and then in 2021 return to the more average growth rate we are used to in Belgium and in the Eurozone, which is slightly above 2%. Unemployment is around 7%, which is more or less the level that was experienced in the year 2016. So it has gone up again, of course, but it's still under the European average, or the Eurozone average, which is 9.6% today. Immediate job losses remained limited. And then, as I said before, the sector of vaccine and pharmaceutical more general has taken really a growth. It already started in 2019. I think we can say that Belgium is a hub, even a global hub for distribution and trade of vaccine and medicines, and it already went up with up to $50 billion in 2019, and this trend has continued during COVID. So a word, if I may, on the trade relationship between Belgium, European Union and the United States. And we all know, and the friends in Charlotte are very well placed to live with this situation every day, that the United States and the European Union continue to have the largest and deepest trade and investment relationship in the world, also during COVID. So in terms of attitude, we continue to think as Belgians and as Europeans that we have a common interest to preserve this situation as best as we can and improve where we can. But of course, during the current administration here in Washington, with all the new trade investigations combined, as we see during COVID, with let's say an uncertain appetite to rescue or to resolve the existing disputes, notwithstanding COVID. So in that type of situation, we adopt in Europe and in Belgium a rather careful approach, still outreaching to the US administration. But we also wish to protect the European and the Belgian trade interests while supporting the settlement of existing divergences. Also, hopefully within a short time frame, but I'm not sure myself that we can still solve things before the end of this administration. But if there is an appetite for a positive economic agenda, then certainly we are all in. Of course, we are watching in Europe the new trade agenda that has been announced by former Vice President Biden and candidate for the presidency. I have to say that he's built a Back Better plan that we've analyzed, that of course it has strong Buy America and Made in America components, and it starts from the premise that the most important country is one's own country, and the most important market is the domestic market. And in the short run, I understand that he does not expect new trade agreements concluded by the United States. But at the same time, his trade proposals, we feel, reflect a more orthodox view of transatlantic economic relations. And it's clear that talking to the people around him who are professionals of policy making, in fact, from most of them from previous administrations, we feel that there is a political willingness to cooperate in the most pragmatic way possible with the European Union, and that in itself contrasts already with the more America alone approach that we've observed during the current administration. So I will conclude with the relationship US-Belgium in trade. I never said when I arrived in Washington that the trade balance between the United States and Belgium is unbalanced in favor of the United States, but at the end of my mandate, I've been so much, and after all the talks I had with the trade experts here and in the administration and the State Department, I have to say something about the trade balance, although as an economist, I still don't think it's that relevant, but it's unbalanced in favor of the US, and we're saying it a bit more often maybe in order to at least hope that we can, that the current administration will abstain to raise added taxes against Belgian exports in the context, for example, of the countermeasures for the Airbus, or the review of the countermeasures in the Airbus file, and also in other contexts. So Belgium is among the 5 countries from which with a huge trade deficit with the United States. But again, I don't think this is so relevant. But we have an open economy, that's clear. And so we worked during the COVID. We continue to work with the US administration on very specific issues, such as a pre-clearance agreement on which I worked for 4 years, but I continued on 5G. Also the Battle of the Bulge, which is the last big battle on the European continent in the Second World War. And I was so moved when last December, so it was before COVID, luckily, I could bring back to Bastogne in the south of Belgium, I could bring 95-year-old veterans to celebrate the 75th anniversary. I think I've never been so moved in my life as being on a plane with them, talking to them, having them suffer the weather, the bad weather in December, like it were they suffered themselves in 44 and 45, the bad weather, the bad winter in the Ardennes. So also I've continued to work on the implementation of the contract that during my term we've concluded with Lockheed and with the defense authorities of the United States on the F-35. And when I look back on that deal, I think it's fair to say that if I would have to start again today, negotiating and concluding, it would probably be more difficult than it was 1.5 years ago. So with that, LG, and I hope I can see all of you on screen very soon, because I felt a bit alone during my initial remarks on the screen. So with that, I turn it back to you and to Millie. So once again, thank you so much to all the friends in Charlotte, because you're all very close to our heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wouters. That was so very interesting. I was telling the ambassador before we got started that I happen to watch the Belgian news many mornings a week on the TV5 Monde, it's the French news channel. And so I saw a really interesting piece this morning on COVID. And thank you so much for your explanation. We're going to start the questions up. Let me go to the Q&A and see, we have 10 already. Ambassador, the first question comes from Dino Buenviage, and if I pronounce your names wrong, please, I'm so sorry. Has the crisis created by COVID-19 exacerbated tensions with Wallonia? Would this lead to another crisis in which a government was not formed for over a year?
And that's an excellent political question. Of course, I will not deny that with the great number of political parties in Belgium, which are separated both in the north and in the south, I mean, or separated from the north and the south, and they all have their own hinterland in the Flemish-speaking part of the country, in the French-speaking part of the country, and their own clients and their own audiences. I will not deny that, given the great number of parties, that it's difficult. It will remain difficult for some time in the future, not just this time, to form federal governments. Having said this, I've seen the COVID-19 coming together in the fight against the pandemic, and there is now even a small chance that the most extreme, but not the most extremes, I'm not saying they're extreme parties, but let's say the biggest party in the south of the country and the biggest party in the north of the country, they're talking again, and that's the key, or at least one of the most important and productive keys to forming a new government. So I don't think COVID has exacerbated tensions. I would even say it's a bit the contrary. Yeah. So.
Excuse me, did you want to say more, Ambassador? I'm sorry.
No, I'm looking at the next question. I've just opened the Q&A.
Yeah, so that's from Lydie Surget, who's president of the Alliance Française here in town. What is your view on the rising autocratic movement in Eastern Europe, specifically since COVID-19?
Well, another great question, and I must say I'm even more preoccupied today than I already was before. I've been following the whole process of, let's say, compromises with the rule of law in countries such as Hungary and Poland. And I think that that it has gotten worse. We have lost the support of American diplomacy in order to address these autocratic movements. I continue to think that some of these countries could have been a bit more grateful to the European Union and to Western Europe for having them taken in after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and also be more grateful because in the past, before the 1989 events, dramatic events with the fall of the wall and the Berlin Wall, that Western Europe has been helpful in taking so many migrants. Also in my country, I remember so many friends from Hungary who were integrated in Belgian society, from Poland. I mean, when these countries and their people were suffering in Central and Eastern Europe, we tried to help them when they were living under the Soviet regime or the influence of the. So now having them, or some of these countries, turn against the countries and the European institutions that provided them with not just with a democratic roof above their house, and with hosting them during the most difficult periods and helping them out. So I think it's, from a historical point of view, it's a rather, it's a reaction that I think is certainly not a reaction of thankfulness, but it's getting worse, and the whole story of Polonization that is now called in Poland, Polonization of the justice system, Polonization of the media, is a strong movement, I think, at the political level, at the level of the younger people, the business people in Poland. I think there's still very much pro-Europe, also in the academic world. But I'm even more concerned now, and I don't think that in Europe we have the right tools to address it. Either we have too soft tools to address an autocratic movement in the European Union, or we have what we call an atomic bomb, which is throwing the member out of the club. But in between these tools, we don't have a lot to address these issues, except personal persuasion. But that's not enough, apparently.
Thank you very much. The next two questions, one is anonymous and one is from Vinny Loganaden, have to do with the U.S. pulling troops out of Germany.
Oh, yes.
Vinny's question is, we'd like to get your thoughts on what the European Union and Belgium in particular are doing to counter the weakening of NATO and the removal of U.S. troops from Germany by the current administration. Can we expect to see a new alliance without the U.S.?
Well, an alliance, a security alliance without the United States in Europe would be a grave mistake, I think, even if it's probably true that compared to the year that NATO was launched, there's much more stability in the European, in Europe than there was at the beginning of NATO. And so that's an element, of course, of reassurance for the United States. And maybe it can be an objective argument to say, okay, it's more stable now, so we don't have to invest as much as we did in the beginning. So I think that's a fair argument. As far, I don't think that we will, if there's a change of administration, I don't think there will be a fundamental shift in the American participation in NATO. I mean, that's what I hear in Washington, on the Democratic side and in Congress. But when it comes to the recent decision, well, the decision of yesterday of troop redeployment in Europe from Germany, of course, it's clear that this is a political decision, but the consequences are also, and the fallout are also political. And I think that the redeployment in terms of number is a bit more than what we were told a couple of weeks ago. So part of the troops are coming home, part is redeployed in Europe, to the Baltic states and to Poland, for example, and part of the troops will redeploy through headquarters. So there is a headquarter. I think it's one of the commands of NATO in Europe, was based in Stuttgart, Germany. And my understanding is that that one might come to, or in part go to Mons in Belgium. Now, of course, if that's the decision, we will host them. But I'm not sure this is the final word, because there will be still some movement in Congress, and if there is a change of administration, this whole thing might take a slightly different course.
Thank you. The next two questions have to do with economics. One is from Savannah Boylan. How is Belgium preparing for the financial implications from COVID-19 and the strong possibility for a recession? Are you looking at how financial crisis might further divisions between Northern and Central Europe and Southern and Eastern Europe within the European Union?
Okay, I couldn't read that one, but I think I got the gist of this question. And of course, it is true that on economic, financial, and monetary issues in Europe, there is a long-standing tension between the North and the South, and that will not disappear overnight. Now, what is remarkable is that at the last European summit, there is an agreement on a stimulus plan around 700 billion euros, and that for the first time in the history of the European institutions and of the European Union, leaders have agreed to transfer money and to show solidarity in the fight against the crisis that goes beyond what we have done before. It would mean, to make a comparison, Amelie, it would mean, for example, that Massachusetts would give aid to, I don't know, Florida, and maybe Texas would transfer resources to Wisconsin. And so that's a new breakthrough in Europe in terms of solidarity. So that in terms of financial solidarity, we go much beyond what was acceptable until recently. And the countries that make the difference here, or maybe one country, is Germany. Germany has always said no to these kinds of transfer union, as we call them. And now Angela Merkel, because she's a bit stronger, she made a political comeback compared to last year. She said, this time, together with France, we will propose a rescue fund that translates this idea of greater solidarity. And the European Commission, that's also a novelty, will go on the financial markets, lend money and distribute it. Take the money on the markets. Now that's also remarkable, because up to now in the history of Europe, it was always the Bank of Europe, which is the European Investment Bank, which is based in Luxembourg, that was doing the financial operations on behalf of the European institution. So they were more neutral, more financially professional, but now it's the political institution. It is like in the United States, you would say the federal government can go on the financial markets, raise money, and redistribute it in the United States. So that's a big thing in terms of integration, isn't it?
That way. The next question is very similar, but I'll ask it anyway. It's Quanta Dawn Light. The initial clouds and storms brought by the pandemic of COVID-19 also bring predictions of economic tsunami throughout the world. Do you have any thoughts on this subject in EU global level, so more of on a global scale?
So what the role will be of the EU in the world of tomorrow, or is that the question, or is it more is it purely an economic question?
It sounds like economics.
It sounds economic. Okay, thank you, thank you. Well, yes, I mean overall worldwide, I mean I think the economic loss will be significant this year. I think it's still almost 5%, which for a worldwide loss is quite a lot. So we will all take a hit. I also think that there will be a reaction, an economic reaction in many parts of the world of favoring the domestic market. We see it in the United States, but also in Europe, we recognize that we have to be a bit more domestic sometimes. So our own national single market in Europe as the first choice. And there will be a repatriation, I think, of economic activity towards those domestic markets, bringing back business. I think that will play also a role. And third, I think that despite the fact that European Union is still very much advocating free trade, it will become more difficult to advocate free trade and free trade policies in their purest form. I don't think people are against free trade per se, but when you link it to globalization, you link it to jobs, you link it or you speak about free trading and COVID, then people become very, very defensive and more critical against the basic idea of free trade, which goes back to, we all know the economist Ricardo, who made this counterintuitive argument: if country A is best in this activity and country B in another activity, they have to specialize and then trade, and there will be a win-win on both sides. So I think economically it still makes a lot of sense, and it's difficult to go against it. But to sell that today is becoming more and more difficult, and I also feel it in my outreach at universities and everywhere. It's becoming more difficult.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for that. We've got an interesting next question from Frédéric Gresset. What lasting impact changes do you expect following the recent turmoil of statues being toppled because of Belgium's colonial past?
Oh yeah, yes. Well, isn't it amazing that I mean the Black Matter movements of the social injustice movement here in the United States had a direct effect on European countries. It spilled over, which is rather, it's rather amazing. So, but it spilled over to Europe and took different forms. And it's true that in Belgium, we were again confronted with our colonial past. And biggest part of the movement we had, of course, there was still a lot about racial discrimination, racism, and so on. But the biggest part was on colonial past, what King Leopold II did in the Congo, which was this big country in the heartland of Africa, and the treatment of the local people there. And so then came the statutes of Leopold II, of this king that was criticized. And the statutes were taken care of in cities, in local villages, and that, but they were not destroyed. They were, I mean, most of them were brought back to museums in order to protect them and to maybe do something else with them. But the movement was strong enough to convince the king of the Belgians to say in public, "I'm sorry for what my family did in the Congo." So, which is, I know, a rather strong move, because as you can imagine, the king of the Belgians has always been rather proud of his family and always wanted to defend his family. Now he said, "I'm sorry for what happened in the past, colonial past." He didn't say, "I apologize," because as you probably know, Millie, dear friends, if you go to the apology switch, you enter the world of compensation and financial cases, before the courts. So we have to be rather careful from a legal point of view when you say, "I apologize," because then there may be legal consequences and financial consequences. So that's, I think, what I wanted to say about the statutes and the link between what you see in the United States and Europe and our colonial past and the role of the king, or the saying sorry by the king of the Belgians for the colonial past.
Very, very interesting in light of what's going on over here. LJ, do we have, there's a great question next. Do we have one more, time for one more?
Yes, absolutely, Millie, go ahead.
Okay, this is a good one. Please comment on the news that Belgium and the United States just signed an agreement that the Brussels airport will be getting a US pre-clearance facility. This would mean that US-bound passengers would clear immigration prior to boarding their flight. Brussels would only be the third European country to get such a facility. Congratulations, Ambassador Wouters, as we know you were very much involved in getting this agreement between the US and Belgium signed. This really isn't a question, but it is interesting, I think, for everybody to really understand what just happened. And thank you for your involvement in this.
Well, thank you. Well, we still have to get it through Parliament in Belgium, but I'm glad that we landed in the negotiations, which were rather complex, as you can imagine. But indeed, I think it's a good thing. I strongly believed in it, that also not just for Belgians but and Americans, but also for the European institutions and the transatlantic, let's say, intercourse, travel. But I've seen in the past in Dublin, which is one of the 3 cities in Europe that has since long pre-clearance, and when you go through the airport of Dublin and you're cleared by American custom and immigration officers who look like Irish, but they are American, and they so you arrive domestic. But I've seen the positive effect, not just on the development of the airport, but above all, the development of the Irish economy. So I think it can have also a positive effect on those regions where an airport manages to pre-clear upon departure instead of clearance at arrival. But I can assure you, after 4 years talking to my friends here in Washington, it's rather complex because you have privacy issues, you have to address the financial issues, you send families abroad, you have law enforcement issues. It's probably one of the most comprehensive negotiations with so many dimensions that I've been conducting over my whole career, but it was a very rewarding one at the end.
Well, thank you for your hard work on this, and let's hope it passes your parliament. And with that, thank you, Ambassador Wouters, and thank you for your time, and thank you for your many visits to Charlotte. We wish you and your family the very, very best. And I'm going to pass it all over to LJ at this point.
Thank you, Millie. Thank you for doing such a great job, Ambassador Wouters. It is always such a pleasure. We hope to see you again. You're invited to come to Charlotte as our guest once you become a private citizen. This session was very interesting. I think we have another 15 questions in the line. We do appreciate, we know you're busy with the opening of the new facility of the Belgian Embassy in DC, and also know you're busy with your packing and getting ready to depart the United States. Thank you for all you did to bring our two nations and peoples closer. Thank you for coming to Charlotte so many times. Thank you for today. I would also like to thank our sponsor, our presenting sponsor, Greer Walker, a leading regional CPA firm here in Charlotte and Greenville. And I would like to thank my board members, the World Affairs Council board members who are always present at these programs. Thank you for your leadership and thank you for being with us today. Our members, our supporters, all of you participating, it's been a great pleasure. Once again, thank you, Ambassador Wouters, and all the best to you and your family and your travel back home to Belgium. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, dear friends. Keep up the good work. And LG, I don't want the last word, but keep an eye on something I will be involved in my new life. In next year, I will bring an economic mission with Belgian companies to the East Coast of the United States. So I will be in touch with you. And of course, I would love to continue the relationship with your wonderful World Affairs Council in Charlotte and the great people that are there. So thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we do work in economic development and foreign direct investment here in Charlotte. And we've organized a number of such meetings and we look forward. I'll keep our eyes open for that, and we'll be more than happy to organize everything you need here in Charlotte and connect you with all the companies and everyone else you might need to meet with your delegation. Thank you once again. We are now adjourned. Everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you for participating. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you.